So the period before the First World War in Canada from about 1896 to 1914 is a period, generally speaking, of enormous economic growth. And what that means is that immigration during that period booms. Canada's population grows by almost 20% during that very short span of time. The West is largely settled, at least by Europeans, during that period. And it's basically a time of unprecedented growth for Canada, which had only become a country essentially 40 years before that. The result then is that large numbers of people from non-traditionally immigrant groups for Canada begin to arrive in the Young Dominion. And what that means is that you're talking about in a time of enormous upheaval in Western Canada.
The war triggered by the assassination of Austro-Hungarian heir Archduke Franz Ferdinand and his wife Sophie on the 29th of June 1914 had profound global consequences. While many venerable countries collapsed under the strain of this great war, the young Canada emerged among the victorious, leading to a prevailing sentiment among Canadians of a nation forged by fire. But this is not true for all Canadians. On the 7th of May 1915, the RMS Lusitania, nearing the end of her transatlantic voyage, was sunk off the coast of Ireland by a German U-boat. Over 1,000 civilians, many of whom were British subjects, perished. Within a day, race riots erupted in British Columbia. For 2 days, a mob surged against the efforts of police and military to loot and destroy German businesses. A few hundred kilometers away, in Kamloops, 3 German businessmen, a butcher, a banker, and a barber, were arrested and brought to Vernon internment camp. Prisoner number 346, the barber, was Wilhelm Walter, born in Stettin, Prussia, in 1859.
By 1898, he had emigrated to England, and in 1901 married an Englishwoman named Stella and became stepfather to her 3 children. For 10 years after their marriage, Wilhelm and Stella lived in Sheffield. By 1913, however, Stella's children had emigrated to Canada, and the couple followed.
Settling in Kamloops, Wilhelm opened his business, a barber shop on Victoria Street. Stella did not follow her husband into internment. There was no need to intern British citizens. Yet, despite having lived on British soil for almost 20 years, Wilhelm himself was still considered a German subject. As such, when Wilhelm died in Vernon in 1918, he was considered a German prisoner of war and buried in the camp cemetery. In 1971, his remains were moved to Kitchener, Ontario, where he was interred in a plot cared for by the German War Graves Commission.
Yet the question begs to be answered: how is it that a 59-year-old man, having lived in British territory for almost 2 decades and married to a British citizen, was considered a German threat to Canada? The answer lies in the War Measures Act, a statute implemented on the 22nd of August 1914 by the Canadian government.
The provisions of this statute allowed for the arrest, detainment, exclusion, and deportation of any individual suspected of anti-Canadian conduct. However, the notion of anti-Canadian conduct, being never clearly defined, led to a nationwide registration program for people of Austro-Hungarian or German citizenship, and a significant number were placed in internment camps. Changes in immigration protocols, altering the necessary time for naturalization from 3 years to 10, stripped thousands of immigrants of their Canadian identity.
For some, such as Wilhelm, this would not mean reversion to their former citizenship.
Rather, due to laws concerning the loss of citizenship in the German and Austro-Hungarian empires, this meant the loss of citizenship entirely, a term which would come to be defined as statelessness.
Statelessness is usually a consequence of conflict. The dissolution of states and reactionary immigration policies can leave people without citizenship. For Wilhelm, this simply meant that there were no laws protecting his rights in life, although the German War Graves Commission has preserved his memory in death. In the case of many Austro-Hungarian internees, statelessness had serious implications in death as well. This is due to the dissolution of the Austro-Hungarian Empire after the First World War. Without a state to protect the war dead, graves of many Austro-Hungarian subjects have fallen to the wayside, with memorials often disappearing entirely. In 1961, the United Nations introduced legislation defining statelessness and designed to protect those affected. Yet, in a survey of history since then, countless people rendered stateless and of so-called enemy origin have suffered through arrests, detention, exclusion, and deportation without the protection of a homeland.
Therefore, it is clear that all nations should avoid policies that, in the words of one Vernon internee, incline to view minorities as subjects or enemies, and instead treat them as separate self-owned individuals, aloof from the quarrels of nations.